One of the things that independents are going to need to figure out for themselves is superhero books, is superpower books. Independent comic publishers tend to want to do other things. They tend to want to look away from them. A lot of creators may be burned out from working at the big two. But with the big two kind of struggling and at times aimless, there's a wide open market there for superhero books. So why aren't they going for it? Hey, everybody, this is Perch. I think that there's one of those kinds of things. It's like it's a market reality, but a lot of people don't necessarily like to accept it. And I use this analogy somewhere. I don't remember where. Or maybe I don't. It doesn't matter. That you know, tons of people will say that Michael Bay makes garbage movies. That they're not thought provoking. They're not intelligent. They're junk movies, fast food movies. But uh, you know, he, Michael Bay also makes movies that make millions of dollars. So it's one of those things where if you're in the movie industry and you're an independent, an actor or you're somebody who really wants to work on highbrow stuff, thought provoking stuff, you may not be excited to work on Michael Bay projects. But if you want to make a big paycheck and if you're a studio, you want to put out something that's kind of bankable, that's likely to make a ton of money, Michael Bay delivers. And I know that there's some people in and around Hollywood in the movie industry who can never quite, accept that fact. And one of the people who, I like very much, I love David Lynch and I love his movies. But David Lynch notes that if a studio is trying to stay in business, they're trying to make money, then they should work with Spielberg or Michael Bay or, these kinds of people who put out very commercially successful films. And, they shouldn't blow all their budget on David Lynch projects. Now, keep in mind, this is coming from David Lynch. So if he can accept that idea, if he can accept the fact that, his movies are, maybe critically acclaimed, maybe thought provoking, has a nice niche audience, but they're not blockbuster. You don't lead your summer slate of films with David Lynch. Then I think all of us should be able to accept that. The independent comics, for whatever reason, you talk to a number of creators, publishers, others. The idea of a superhero universe is almost like, oh, you're doing that, you're doing that kind of that superhero stuff. Okay, well, superhero is it's out of fashion. People are getting tired of superheroes. Except there's no evidence that's the case. In fact, every data point you look at suggests that superhero genre, whether it's over in Japan with My Hero Academia, or whether it's in the U.S. with the movies of the MCU, what's funny is the DC universe is often billed as this colossal flop, except there are tons of studios and lines. Like, go talk to the Universal Monsters imprint, and you tell me if they wouldn't like to have the DC Universe's box office. I mean, when you look at Harley Quinn: Birds of Prey, and you're like, man, that movie is a huge disappointment. For most studios, it would not be. I understand the perception. I understand kind of how things evolve and change, and I mean, totally get it. And the expectations you set matter. But there, suffice it to say, you can roll out a superhero movie and it typically will do quite well, better than normal. It's still a bankable property, and there's no indications that's dying anytime soon. Steve Orlando is doing his Commanders in Crisis, I think, book. It's got a lot of buzz. It's got a lot of attention. Now, what's interesting is some of the news sites are crediting Steve Orlando as the reason for this, and I'm taking nothing away from him as a creator. I think fine. He's got a good run. He puts out solid work, no doubt about it. But another big part of it is the hook. The title itself is in demand. There are not a lot of superhero books over an Image. Invincible did really well. It was a good book, too. But there's not a lot of superhero books as you go down the line of the different properties. And sometimes when they do a superhero book, sort of like what Valiant does, there's almost it feels when I read when I read some of Valiant's comics, at times it feels like they're ashamed of the fact that they're putting out a superhero book. It kind of it comes through in the pages. It almost feels like they're having to apologize or kind of make up for the fact that they're doing a hero book. And it's peculiar. It's like, accept who and what you are. The world, your market wants you to do this. There's interest in Kate books or hero books or movie. There's strong interest. I think if you're a small, I mean, and I'll put another point to it. The whole Comicsgate crowdfunding thing. A bunch of those books are superhero books. They're done by amateurs, people who have no, they've got no background to them in a lot of cases. I'm not talking about the names, but just some of these other people. And you see people snapping this stuff up. Now, is it because they're all trying to own the libs? Maybe that's some of it, but I think a bigger part of it is it's content people are hungry for. And granted, at a much smaller scale. I mean, the Comicsgate, the crowdfunding world is still small, all things considered, but it's growing. And the fact that it's growing is, in some cases, despite a ton of negative press and people, all the descriptions of what it is, they're putting out superhero books. There's an interest in superhero books. It really kind of is that simple, and that there's a market being served. And I think that a lot of indie companies, a lot of publishers would do themselves a very big favor if they just leaned into it a little bit more. I'm not saying turn all your books into hero books, but more than the zero that in a lot of cases you're producing. It makes sense. I think that there's a huge argument to be made for not accepting what is successful, even if it's not what you personally are interested in. I think this is a big trap, by the way, that people in comics often fall into. They think of themselves as, we are creatives. We are, we have to do work that speaks to our heart, whether or not it's successful, whether or not we make any money, the kind of romance of the starving artist. And that's fine. You can certainly live that romance, but there's nothing shameful. You're not a sellout if you simply make books people want to read. I mean, you can say Michael Bay is a sellout all you want. He's also loaded. He can pretty much write his own ticket. And I think if Michael Bay wanted to spend the next 10 years making bizarre experimental films, he could do it. I mean, eventually people get wise to it and decide he's not the moneymaker anymore, but he's got that credibility. And that's credibility that a lot of creative people want. But in order to get that, they've got to prove a connection to their audience. They've got to prove that they can make things that people actually want to buy. And for many people in comics, that seems like a dirty word. That seems like they're going to be thought less of. And by the way, I think that there's a lot of peer pressure that goes on here. I've been down to cons with a bunch of kind of new creators, older creators, and everything else. And the older creators are like, I'm so tired of these Kate books. And they almost put pressure on the younger creators, like, you should be tired of that too. You should be. But in the most cynical, bitter way, a lot of those older creators are frankly, washed up. They're not getting calls for work anymore. And you've got this new generation of talent. And why are you trying to sabotage these people out the gate? If you encourage them to do the weird, wacky indie project slice of life thing that's going to appeal to a tiny segment, I mean, if that's what they want to do, more power to them. But if their goal is to make it big, if you want to be a big name in comics, then you're going to have to do work that lots of people want. And when I say lots of people, I mean the right and the left. You're going to have to find a way to bridge that gap. It's not impossible. Books seem to do it all the time. You can do it. You don't have to just go one way or the other. You can lean into this stuff. And you can, as weird as it sounds, and I'm not a fan, you have to think a little bit more like Michael Bay. You have to think about getting paid, and you have to think about putting out work that people are going to enjoy, that mass amounts of people are going to enjoy. When you want to do your small project, for a small audience that speaks to kind of your own personal experience or something in your life, that's awesome. Do that too. Don't just do soulless corporate work. But the soulless corporate work not only pays the bills, but it can be extremely rewarding because you are going to reach that big audience. Don't put that pressure on your audience to, you know, well, let's see. The best way I want to describe this is I've watched creators almost shame the fans for liking what they like. Like, oh, you like Spider-Man? Well, Spider-Man's stupid. Spider-Man's for babies. Like, okay, but there's, hundreds of thousands of people who would just love to see Spider-Man doing something cool. So, I mean, I'm just saying you could do that. At any rate, I find it interesting. I think superhero books, Kate books, are still a big interest. That market is not going away. Lots of people will come and by all means argue with me in the comments below, but that market is still clearly there. It's not just aging people in their 40s collectors. And frankly, if those people were all shelling out bucks, who cares? Take the aging 40, age collectors, take their money. But don't quickly discount the value of mass market appeal. Mass market appeal is what, at the end of the day, gets you the credibility, gets you the name, gets you the freedom to do the projects you want. Discount it today, you're never actually going to wind up with that freedom tomorrow. And, then you'll never get to do anything you want. You'll just kind of work on sad little, bitter pieces of work. Yeah. So if you're an indie right now, I would try and figure out how you do a good superhero book. I mean, again, Steve Orlando's figuring out something. He's got a solution. You're seeing more of these titles come out slowly in the indies. If you're an indie creator, and the way I view it is, you could figure it out now for yourself, or you can watch helplessly as a bunch of bigger name writers for the big two kind of flee Marvel and DC as they slowly implode and basically just take all the work at your, they're going to get the fame at the small indie, not you. So maybe you should, get up on that. I don't know. It's your choice, your career. Anyway, what do you think? Argue with me below. Are superhero Kate books dead? Is there still life and market in them? What do you think? Leave your thoughts below. Hey, like, subscribe. Thank you for joining the channel. I really appreciate your input, and your listens, and all that kind of stuff. All wonderful. Follow me on social media. Shoot me an email. Thanks for listening.